name of the program is Excursion. I'm Bradley Thunderbird Phoenix, your host. My guest today is Ian Wilder, Secretary of the Green Party for Suffolk County, Long Island, New York. Ian, welcome to Excursion.
Yeah, Bradley, good to be here.
This is the question I ask all of my guests, even when I had my radio show, and that question is, Ian, where were you born and raised?
Okay. I was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, home of Friendly's Ice Cream and Parker Brothers. But my family moved down here when I was almost 3 years old, so I consider myself a Long Islander. Grew up here, went to all my schools here, and I identify with Long Island.
Now, what inspired you to become political? This is what I want to know.
Oh, that's a long story. I would have to say my parents. My parents were always activists. My mother has a long activist resume. She was chair of the Tri-State League of Women Voters, the chair of the Babylon Environmental Commission at one point, founding member of the Babylon Youth Board, and in her 70s, she's still president of the Copiague Youth Council. Together, my parents did voter registration through the Council of Christians and Jews in the 70s. My father did all kinds of stuff with daycare for children and education activism. So I came from an activist household. When I was 17, my mom decided to run for town board on the Democratic line in a town that was then Republicanly controlled, which explains why I'm used to fighting for the underdog. And the next year I became a Democratic committeeman. I stayed that way for 10 years. So it was just a natural evolution into politics. I didn't have much choice.
Okay, now let's talk about the Green Party. What is the Green Party?
What is the Green Party? Well, the Green Party is a political party, just like the Democrats and the Republicans. It's a group of people that get together around common values to try and elect candidates. To explain a little bit, because I stopped with my life story, and maybe this will help a little bit. I actually went from being a Democrat for a long time and being deeply involved in that, working in numerous campaigns at all levels. I got sick of both parties, went to an independent, and then in 2000, as did many Greens, was attracted back by Nader's campaign for president. He was running the Green Party line.
Yes.
Now at that point, I had been so burnt by partisan politics, I didn't even trust Ralph Nader, who is probably, the public citizen of the last 100 years. I saw critics such as Noam Chomsky and Wendell Berry, who's the essayist and poet, were backing Nader's run in 2000, and I know those two hardly trust anybody. So I said, this must be the real deal, and this looked like a vehicle for change.
Now, we're here on Long Island. How many chapters does the Green Party have on Long Island?
Well, the Green Party is set up in New York State and nationally, and actually internationally, just like other political parties. In the United States, we have a national party. Below that, there are state parties, which in fact make up the national party. The state party in the political system in the United States is the major player from which national parties and county parties are made up. On Long Island, we have both the Nassau and Suffolk County Green Party. I just got elected secretary of the Suffolk County Green Party. I think I held that position a couple of years back because I've been very active locally. And we also have people that are active on a more local level. In Babylon, where I live, we hold monthly meetings. We bring in speakers about topics that people are interested in, whether it's somebody from Amnesty International, or somebody about immigration, or somebody even about 9/11. We try and mix that up. We bring in musicians that people will be interested in, or people who can bring in activist skills, like nonviolent communication, for instance.
Okay. Now, where did the Green Party originate? What country?
That's a great question, because from my understanding, and I am not a Green Party historian, it is, there's actually two different places where people consider it started. In Germany, where the Green Party is still strongest probably in the world, is one place it's considered started. Other people says it started in Tasmania, which is an island off Australia.
Okay.
The values that are shared by the Green Party internationally, and the Green Party spans every country in the European Union. It's the only party that does that. And it goes across the world. Wangari Maathai is a woman from Kenya who won the Nobel Peace Prize for getting women to plant trees through the whole country. Let's say the country she won it recently. One of the things the media didn't report is she also founded the Green Party in Kenya. So in terms of where it started, people think Germany and Tasmania, but it's actually international, and it shares 4 common values internationally. Nonviolence, grassroots democracy, social and economic justice, and ecological wisdom, of course, because most people associate ecology with the Green Party. But most of the Greens are involved believe it's those 4 values altogether.
Okay, now do you think the Green Party has been successful here in the United States?
We've been as successful as you can be in the United States. I honestly believe the system here has been perverted to a state that it doesn't work the way it was originally intended. It was originally intended that every state, every area would be a laboratory for different ideas to develop. There's nothing in our Constitution that says we have a 2-party system. It's a function of how our government is set up, and not only that, how the voting is done within that government. There's nothing that says we have to have a winner-take-all system. It does say we don't have a parliamentary system, we have a bicameral legislature nationally. But how those people are elected within the state, there are many different systems you can use. Now, we've been successful because in a number of ways. It depends on, ballot access laws within the state. It changes from state to state. In California, the ballot access laws are friendly to third parties. We have like 100,000 members there. We have hundreds of Greens elected to office. What we found is winning is defined differently in different places. On the local level, it's often defined as being elected. On larger races, it's about influencing policy and discussion. And we found whenever a Green runs for office, the other candidates talk about different issues that they would otherwise ignore. That a Green affects what the discussion is within that race. So to us, that's winning, because if you look at the history of third parties in the United States, and we have to remember that the Republican Party was a third party that opposed slavery. It was not one of the majority parties. When Lincoln got elected, it became a majority party. Interestingly enough, stop and think about that. They opposed slavery at that time. So they were a pro-civil rights party when they were founded. But there have been other third parties in this country that have changed the dialogue. For instance, there was a women's suffragette party that pushed and pushed and pushed. They didn't really elect a lot of people, but they got the women's right to vote. In the early 1900s, when there was more ability to run candidates, we had a populist party, farmers party, and we had the Socialist Party. Many people know Eugene Debs, who was their candidate again and again and again, and pushed an agenda for a government that was more caring. What came out of that? Roosevelt's New Deal. That's what third parties often do on the larger plateau, is change the course of discussion and influence the legislative agenda to bring a country more towards where people want it. Now, I said the system was perverted. What happened was, around the time of the Civil War, corporations were given the right to be considered human beings, which they're not. They have the right to influence political campaigns. They have the right to donate. Now, they should not have that. They are not voters. They are a conglomeration of property. Now, the people who own that property, individually with their money, as human beings, have the right to have a say. But the corporation should not. And that's why the Greens talk about the Democrats and Republicans being corporately owned parties. And that's why we're often misquoted when we say there's not much difference, because they take their money from the same people. When you look at, in the last race, Kerry's donors and Bush's donors, they're not much different. It's the same people from the same corporations and the same corporations giving them money. What happens? Their policy is generally going to be influenced in the same direction. Well, it's one of the big things the Greens talk about. Green Party candidates do not take corporate money because we don't believe corporations should have a say. Only living, breathing human beings should have a say. And that's what politics should be for. It should be for human beings.
Okay, now, you touched on it. But
Sure.
Let's expand on that.
I know, I said a lot.
Amplify. Yes, and that's good. How does the Green Party differ from libertarians, Democrats, socialists, Republicans? How do they differ? What are their principles?
Well, the four principles I outlined, the nonviolence,
Okay.
which is the biggest one, because I don't think any of the other parties you named, and I don't even think the socialists have a pillar of nonviolence. Nonviolence is a very, very powerful idea, and people forget it's an American idea. Henry David Thoreau is known for writing about Walden Pond. He also wrote an essay called On Civil Disobedience, which was used by Gandhi and used by King, which they expanded greatly and brilliantly and put into action for large masses of people and taught people about. But not only did Thoreau write about it, he went to jail because he refused to pay a tax that was going to a war against Mexico he didn't believe in. And there's a famous story about Emerson, the other writer, coming to the bars of the jail and saying, "Henry, this is stupid. I will pay the tax to get out of the jail." And he said to Thoreau, "What are you doing in there?" And Thoreau said the famous line. He said, "What are you doing out there?" And that's the question that civil disobedience or nonviolence always asks. And nonviolence does work. Look at the change in this country that Reverend King brought. And imagine the amount of violence that would have happened to cause that change if we didn't have a leader who stood up and demanded it and put his own body on the line for nonviolence and the debt we owe to him. The same thing, Gandhi did the same thing in India. India is a huge country. Imagine the violence that would happen to free them from England. He talked about actually saving England's soul because he saw that in basically enslaving the Indian people were ruining the soul of England as much as the soul of the people there. That, you know, they talked about in South Africa, that, you know, the chains of slavery, which is what apartheid was, is chained from the person being kept down to the person keeping it down. It ruins both souls. So that's an important thing that the Green Party stands for that I really believe doesn't exist in other parties. Now, for instance, you will have libertarians who oppose war because they believe that tax dollars shouldn't be used for preemptive war. But they are not, they will oppose certain wars, but they are not opposed to the concept of war. People in the Green Party do not believe that the concept of war has ever solved anything. That doesn't. That violence leads to more violence. As Dr. King talked about in the year before he was killed, he gave speeches about the Vietnam War, and he said, you know, hate cannot conquer hate, only love can. Marvin Gaye also put that to music. And those were powerful things that they don't quote from Dr. King. The other, in terms of the other pillars, they're important also. I think, you know, the Greens believe, for instance, in dealing with global warming, they do a much broader analysis. When you hear some of the Democrats talk about it, Democratic leaders, I should say, they talk about people buying light bulbs, but they don't talk about what GE's doing or Ford Motor. Those are where the major institutional changes have to be made. Or that the fact that we need to shut down our coal burning plants and put up windmills and solar cells, and that can only be done on a large scale. Everybody changing their light bulb is not going to do it. Yes, it's a nice piece of the puzzle, and it's one layer of it. Co-op America talked about this. They showed that the way to deal with global warming and reduce our carbon is in wedges. And what they said is each wedge may not give you as much reduction as you want. Some will give more, some will give less. But you need to do all of them. They gave like 10 different things. And one of them was change consumer habits. But other were large changes that we needed. I believe, from my experience, the values I found in the Green Party were honestly values that I thought when I was a Democrat, and maybe values when people are Republicans that they think is in their party. I found there weren't. I mean, I was active as a Democratic committeeman. I worked in Democratic presidential campaigns, governor campaigns, the whole thing. And I slowly saw that both on the local level all the way to the national level, that the values I believed in were not expressed. And the last straw for me was, and this goes to social and economic justice,